Warning, the video you are about to consume contains spoilers for both Jurassic World Rebirth and Primitive War. Also contains narration from a very sexy source who 100% is not the critical drinker.
Time to move.
2025 gave us two major dinosaur movies, Jurassic World Rebirth and Primitive War. Both tried to recapture the magic of the original Jurassic Park. That sense of walking with dinosaurs, the action, the survival, the chaos, all of it. Only one of them is actually going to stand the test of time. The other, despite having the bigger budget, all the studio polish, is going to be completely forgotten in years to come. And somehow that one appears to be cheaper than the smaller production. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly why there's a massive gap between the two. We'll compare how each movie sets up its big scenes, how the characters react, how they escape danger, the dialogues, the deaths, and how the survivors communicate under pressure. Basically, what one movie does right, while the other does wrong, and why only one of these films actually works. Before we start, I would like to make something clear. Yes, I understand that both of these movies take place in universes where dinosaurs can be cloned, genetically re-engineered, or even walk through literal stargates. That's fine. I'm not critiquing the science fiction. I'm critiquing the storytelling. Because even in a world where you can build a teleporter for a T-Rex, human beings are still ultimately human beings. Stuff needs to make somewhat sense. For example, if you shoot a guy in the head, there's a high chance he's going to die. If a man falls into the mouth of a giant prehistoric monster, the odds are also not very much in his favor. Just because your universe has a Belugosaurus Rex doesn't mean the basic rules of human behavior, logic, and consequence suddenly stop applying. And that's where the two main differences between these movies really show. Narrative coherence is one of those things that separates a good story from a messy one. Let's simplify everything down to one question. How do our characters actually get here? Because the answer reveals one of the big differences between the two films. Within Rebirth, our heroes are sent to collect blood samples from three large dinosaurs. And why is that? It's to fight heart disease. Because apparently, if you want a healthy heart, you don't need a balanced diet, you need blood from a 40-ton animal. Okay, let's play along with the movie's logic. They need big dinosaur blood because big dinosaurs have big hearts. That's totally fine. The film tells us that dinosaurs now live around the equator and only the equator, and then immediately shows us a full-size sauropod blocking traffic in a completely non-equatorial city. I hope that's the right word. So right away, the canon's broken. Even worse, the sauropod is absolutely big enough to drain a blood sample from. It's standing right there, causing a traffic jam. The entire mission is find large dinosaurs to get blood from, and then the movie just drives past one. Instead, the script sends the characters to an island for a suicide mission we already know that they do not need to take. Primitive War, by contrast, keeps things simple and coherent. The characters are already in Vietnam because they're soldiers. The mission is already military, finding a missing Green Beret. Dinosaurs ambush them along the way, and that attack naturally escalates into the rest of the story. No contradictions, no contrived errands, no fetch quest dressed up as any kind of plot. The difference being is Primitive War earns its setup, Rebirth manufactures one, and then contradicts itself before the story even begins. Escape and Survival highlight the difference in narrative coherence and character intelligence between these two films. Within Rebirth, Scarlett Johansson's character Zora already has a plan. If radio silence lasts more than 24 hours, a helicopter is supposedly crashed and circles certain areas of the island. That's their extraction plan. It's clear, pre-planned, and makes somewhat sense. But when the D-Rex shows up and eats the helicopter, problem solved, except not really, because now the entire mission is thrown into chaos. Later, the group finds a fully functioning boat on the dock. Duncan, played by Mashallah Ali, sacrifices himself to help others escape, only for the movie to reveal he's somehow still alive. Basically, the movie keeps tossing in last-minute convenient solutions and reversals. Planned extractions, self-sacrifices, and sudden plot twists all undermine logic, tension, and especially stakes. Stakes. Primitive War, by contrast, keeps things grounded and logical. The group is split, Baker and Leon, the new guy and radio operator, in one team, and the rest of Vulture Squad in the other. Only one group has the radio, so they have limited communication with the outside world. Both groups make smart, calculated decisions. They move toward locations that make sense strategically, whether it's regrouping, avoiding danger, or working together to stop the super collider. When they meet with a Russian scientist who understands the collider, the stakes get higher. One wrong move, like an external explosion, could react worse than a hydrogen bomb. Baker intentionally keeps a location a secret from Colonel Jericho. He refused extraction because the mission has changed. What started as a simple reconnaissance to find out what happened to a missing Green Beret has suddenly escalated into a potential disaster that needs to be prevented at all costs. The team has to act intelligently, and every choice that they have carries real consequences. Unlike Rebirth, there's no deus ex machina boats or magically surviving sacrifices. Everyone's decisions have weight. Vulture Squad moves logically to regroup, avoid danger, or even walk out if necessary, and the stakes feel real. The difference, in short, Rebirth throws in a chaotic last minute solution to keep the plot moving, even if it breaks logic. Primitive War's characters earn their survival through intelligent planning, communication, and strategic decision making. One story respects its universe and the intelligence of its characters, the other completely undermines it for spectacle. In Rebirth, the major story beats revolve around collecting blood samples from three huge dinosaurs, the Mosasaur, Titanosaur, and the Quetzal. Each event is meant to be thrilling, but the setup and stakes often collapse under the weight of the film's own logic. First of all, we have the Mosasaur and the Spinos. The plan is attach Zora to the bow of the ship while it rocks violently. This is explained through Zora herself to the scientist. When the Mosasaur attacks, things go completely sideways. The Spinosaurs are coordinating in a symbiotic relationship with the Mosasaur, and two characters end up dying. One is ripped off the boat while attacking the Spinos, and the other is attacked on shore. The chaos ends with the boat being scuttled. During this sequence, the villain performs an act meant to mark him as morally reprehensible. He allows a teenage girl to slide off the side of the ship. This is framed as villainous because his intent is clear. He does not care about civilians on this mission. He sees the journey as illegal and incredibly dangerous, so their survival is not a priority. In fact, he actively discourages it. While technically this adds a villain moment, it's still undercut by the film's chaotic tone and inconsistent treatment of stakes. Second of all, we have the Titanosaur. After surviving the Mosasaur attack, the group encounters a Titanosaur in long grass, somehow able to hide there. Characters treat this as a magical, emotional experience. The problem is, two of their close friends just died. One was ripped apart, well, sorry, two, in fact, were ripped apart by the Spinosaurs, yet everyone seems completely unfazed. The Titanosaurs are obviously lethal as well. The characters behave as this is a fun wildlife encounter. The setup does exist from the museum where Zora explains to the scientist about seeing dinosaurs in the wild is much different from seeing them at the zoo. And this is similar to how Claire explained it in Fallen Kingdom, saying about would you want your children to exist in a world without dinosaurs? All that being said, the emotional consequences are completely ignored and danger is downplayed for spectacle again. Moving on to the Quetzal, the team is to abseil down to collect the blood from the eggs, resulting in the death of the French tank character. Again, it's treated lightly, almost comically, despite the real danger. The scientist survives a situation he absolutely should not by falling through the trees Avatar style, and they just keep the story moving, and it's sort of played for laughs when the characters hit the ground safely. Bear in mind that the clerk has just been swallowed whole by a Quetzal in front of Marshal Ali, and he almost has absolutely zero reaction to this. The introduction of the D-Rex and the villain reveal. The crew regroups at a convenience shop, which is there for no strong reason, but our characters are there because that is the extraction point for Zora's pre-mentioned helicopter. Mutadons and the D-Rex eventually appear. One character is revealed as the villain because of prior morally dubious acts, including letting the teenage girl fall off the side of the ship, reinforcing the idea he prioritizes the mission and his own image over anything else. In this moment, however, he is willing to let all the characters wait for the helicopter together, despite being the only one holding an actual weapon that can do anything about it. And if we look back to the event where the girl falls off the side of the ship, there probably wasn't a lot that character could have actually done to save her. and this is painted as him being the worst thing since sliced bread. I will also say that there's not a single part of it where they think maybe this guy just shot himself and he was too scared to move from his position. And I don't know if anyone's ever been on ship during rough conditions. You tend to get thrown about a lot. So it probably didn't even feel like he could even make it over to her. None of this is taken into account, and the guy's 100% an evil bastard now. Okay, fair enough. Let's just roll with it. The evil bastard guy also survives some improbable attacks thanks to a conveniently functional Jeep, and is eventually then eaten by the D-Rex, and even more conveniently, the blood samples fall out the animal's mouth next to the scientist. Final extraction. Mahershala Ali's character sacrifices himself by distracting the D-Rex with a flare, but later is revealed that he survived. Unfortunately, this kind of robs from his initial sacrifice, as it doesn't actually mean anything. It just goes to show that all the characters within this, or at least certain characters, had plot armor whilst others didn't. If he was in the same position as Leclerc abseiling down the cliff with the Quetzal, I guarantee he would not have gone down its throat. The same way you know that nothing was ever going to happen to Zora the scientist, or annoyingly any of the family members. This is actually a damn shame because Jurassic World Rebirth did have the ability to become an amazing movie, even if it was just a daft dinosaur popcorn flick. But when you completely kill off all the stakes, there's no point in watching anymore. Primitive War sets up its big events carefully, grounding them in character knowledge, environment, cause, and effect. First of all, when the group lands in the valley, they're immediately met with large footprints and feathers, even comparing them to Liberace's. This already establishes severe danger. The Utahraptor later grabs Baker by his leg and drags him away from the group. He's able to fend it off using his rifle. Stakes are immediate and believable, showing that danger can now strike at any moment. During their first encounter with a Deinonychus herd, the group retreats into a narrow claustrophobic cave, and the confined space and panic lead to the group fracturing. Leon and Baker form one team, and the rest of Vulture Squad forms the other. The split is caused by environmental constraints, natural fear, and not arbitrary storytelling. The cave setting emphasizes tension, danger, and realistic consequences of being trapped with lethal predators. After a T-Rex attack, the team encounters the Russian scientist, who is initially reluctant to share information. She is still struggling with her morphine addiction and suspicious of the Americans, even referring to them as the enemy. She withholds crucial information about the collider and the man that is in charge of it. Only after the team regroups with the main Vulture Squad and goes to great lengths to save one of their members does she recognize their integrity. She eventually relents and shares what she knows, establishing them as trustworthy allies. A second main Predator attack is after regrouping with the main squad, the group is attacked by Deinonychus again. The Russian scientist shows her usefulness by telling the group that half are going to be on the ground, the other half are going to be ambushing you from the trees. This is vital tactics for the group to adapt to the new threat. One member, who is already critically injured, is dragged away during this attack. This later sets up his self-sacrifice, where he gives his life to save the rest of the squad. The attack reinforces the ongoing lethal threat of dinosaurs and maintains the tension. Keyes' sacrifice also feels very earned. As Keyes is critically injured, he chooses to give up his own life to save his friends, and the rest of the group oblige as they realize that he is also going to be a burden, but they also don't want to leave their friend behind, leaving the decision finally up to him. Every choice within this has a consequence, and the stakes in fact feel real. Keyes' sacrifice has the consequence of inspiring Logan to sacrifice himself also, even though he is a prisoner of his own mind. He chooses to have his death at least mean something. As the team plans a covert attack on the Russian camp to disable the collider, the stakes are high and their plan reflects their intelligence and resourcefulness. We understand that the group can't just blow the area up or mark it or give the information freely to Jericho, as he'll immediately just destroy the area. Instead, they decide they're going to use their intelligence to covertly infiltrate and literally pull the plug on the collider using the knowledge of the Russian scientist. Complications arise naturally. For example, the T-Rex appears, as you can see it wandering the valley to try and find its mate, and later discovers that the Russians have killed one of their babies. So naturally, it goes into Mama Bear mode and starts destroying everything, regrouping with the daddy T Rex, and then even more hell breaks loose. Due to the noise, the commotion, the fact that the Utah Raptors are already tracking Vulture Squad, the Utah Raptors also appear, turning the carefully planned, quiet, clever mission of going in and destroying the collider naturally into all out chaotic combat, consistent with the danger that was established earlier. To summarize, Primitive War doesn't just end, it pays off everything it has built up across the whole story. Baker initially withholds the team's exact location from Colonel Jericho because he knows what the Colonel actually intends to do with the collider. When he finally learns the truth that Jericho wants to keep it intact for America's use, Baker realizes that cannot happen. The collider has already cost the lives of two of his closest friends, and the longer it stays active, the higher the human toll will climb. The problem needs to be ended now before things get incredibly worse. Meanwhile, the mission has gained urgency. The Russian villain, whose name I keep forgetting, is close to activating the collider again, and they can't simply nuke the valley because the fallout and dimensional damage would be catastrophic. Jericho wants technology preserved for American control, and he expects the site to be prepped and stable for his infiltration, not a war zone. But no one's actually prepared for what's coming. Primitive War's finale is built on a chain of events that the story has already carefully set up. For example, we know two adult T Rexes and their babies are roaming the valley. We saw one fall off the cliff when it was chasing Baker and Leon. We saw them trying to regroup. We saw it hunting the Vulture Squad, even had Miller pinned against a tree. We saw the juvenile encounter the Russians, and the Russians killed it. So when the mother finds her dead offspring, and the father comes charging in with all the noise and gunfire happening, it makes perfect sense. They were always going to end up in that area, and they're always going to come. The resulting T Rex rampage feels like an inevitable collision of everything we've witnessed. The Utah Raptor pack has already shown that they hunt the squad intentionally, track them over long distances, and regroup after losses. They were beaten back earlier, and so they decide to return in far greater numbers. And the valley-wide chaos gives them the perfect moment to strike. So when a massive wave of raptors descends on the burning camp, it's logical, it's foreshadowed, and it's terrifying. Finally, with Jericho's arrival, because Baker finally transmits their position, Jericho arrives expecting a clean, controlled extraction, the collider intact, and the Americans ready for repurposing. What he gets is a battlefield with dozens of raptors, two enraged T Rexes, Russian soldiers, and Vulture Squad fighting for their lives. Jericho did not expect a shootout. The audience expected it because the story built to it. All this climaxes in a brutal, chaotic extraction. Vulture Squad makes a final stand in front of the helicopter, buying seconds of survival for each other. Setups pay off, like the Sergeant Xavier uses the machete he was insisting was essential gear to behead a dinosaur. The firefight is massive, it's character driven, and it's unpredictable. Russians and Americans even end up fighting side by side because at this point, survival matters more than any kind of politics. And finally, we have Baker's death. Brian Baker dies right next to the Super Collider platform, locked in a violent struggle with the lead Utah Raptor known as Cyclops, a predator that stalked the team the entire story. He kills it with a knife to the neck as the the collider explodes around him. It's tragic, it's heroic, and it's absolutely fitting. His last thoughts being with his friends. My point is, Primitive War earns its ending because every element, every dino encounter, every human conflict, every setup leads naturally to this explosive, bloody, chaotic finale. Nothing comes out of nowhere. Everything has a cause and everything has a payoff. It's just the opposite of Rebirth, where scenes just kind of happen. Primitive War builds towards its climax, whereas Rebirth kind of stumbles into one. Now I can confirm that the balls of Primitive War have definitely given my throat irreparable damage. Anyway, I'm not in the spirit of slapping around a film just for sport. At this point, it does feel like I'm punching down, so we're going to discuss Rebirth ending. And I'm not going to pretend to be some hyper intelligent critic for pointing out obvious problems here. The issue is pretty simple. The finale is a hodgepodge of events pushed together with no connective tissue. And once you start looking at the sequence in detail, the coincidences pile up until the entire thing collapses under its own weight. First of all, as a quick disclaimer here,
The movie insists that the Jeep that the bad guy jumps into is fine, so let's just say it's fine. We'll suspend our disbelief and accept that this relic somehow runs. But this section isn't just about the Jeep itself, it's about the villain's situation when Zora is right beside him. And there's probably people out there that are thinking he could have grabbed her, at least the movie's insisting upon it. But in context, that would have been absolutely suicidal for a number of reasons. There's a Mutadon literally right on top of them. The Jeep has no roof. If he tried grabbing Zora, there's a good chance that either him, her, or both of them will get chopped up instantly by it. On top of that, as well, this entire group has already turned on him. His chance of survival with these people are effectively zero. They've made up their minds about him. When the helicopter was coming and that was still an option, he was happy to jump on that with all of them. He was going to do it in a heartbeat. But riding with the group that openly despises him is just volunteering to get executed the moment they feel safe, which is possible. There's a good chance he might fall asleep or set his handgun down where he shouldn't, or maybe they just all rush him at once and throw him out. That's even more likely when they're at sea. So, from his point of view, leaving isn't cowardly, it's incredibly rational. Staying means either getting eaten by a dinosaur or turning his back on a full group of people that want him dead. Neither is a particularly good option. Thus, he bails in the Jeep. It's the only survival move that actually makes sense if you think about it. Moving on to the absurd Jeep chase and the D-Rex is where it gets really ridiculous. The villain is tearing down the road as fast as the Jeep's saddled Jeep legs will carry it, and he's covering ground at real speed. Meanwhile, the family is navigating an underground concrete maze that they've never seen before. And not to mention, the dad has an injured leg, which is painful enough to impede his movement. His very young daughter is carrying a literal dinosaur in her backpack. They're being chased by several mutadons that are more than likely blocking off pathways and forcing detours. And the underground maze that they're in is actually a maze. It's branching paths, dead ends, multiple routes. And this is also after they ripped off the raptor scene from the first Jurassic Park. So logically, they should be far, far behind the Jeep, but the film magically places them ahead of it. Then we have the D-Rex, which is a giant lumbering theropod thing, and that also arrives before the Jeep does, despite it being larger, slower, trapped behind earlier events, and having no clear straight route. Yet all three parties, the family and the mercenary people, the D-Rex and the bad guy Jeep, arrive at the same location at the same time, with the Jeep even crashing into the D-Rex as it comes downhill. This isn't timing or has any sense in geography. The script needs everyone in one place, so they just kind of teleport there. Remember the Mutadons as well. This should realistically be their hunting ground. Granted, I understand that it might be quite strange sharing territory with the D-Rex because that thing should realistically own the island. The T-Rex there should also be a million miles away from anything the D-Rex is in. In fact, I think the D-Rex might have already exterminated that as a rival, but anyway, who cares? The Mutadons 100% should be familiar with the maze tunnel situation underneath the facility because there's a damn good chance that they've been in there a good number of times. Therefore, they should be able to coordinate an attack with anyone fleeing down there, easily being able to trap them. They're fast, they're aggressive, and they can spread through multiple tunnels. The family picking the right path the first time while panicked and injured is already a stretch, but somehow beating the Mutadons, the vehicle, and, well, even just surviving in general, for Zora to get to them and pop a couple of caps in the Mutadon's ass. Also, I've just had another thought. The bad guy drops his Glock and Zora has it in her hand at this point, and we're also saying that that Glock is somehow working again. So when the bad guy sped off in the Jeep, the only thing he has handcuffed to him is the blood samples. So there's absolutely zero chance he can be around these people now because now he's lost his only leverage of stopping them from killing him. Finally, there's also the issue of the heart disease miracle cure, because this is where the film tries to end on some kind of grand altruistic sacrifice. But I'm not entirely sure. And I'm asking the question to the audience here because I'm not for one second going to pretend to be an expert on this. So definitely jump in to disagree with me if I'm wrong here and giving you insights. I really want to hear it. So the movie treats Zora giving the heart disease curing blood samples to the world as a noble, beautiful gesture, a selfless act for humanity, and lets the people have it. Something along those lines. It's been about 6 months since I've seen the film, but by this point, the movie's already losing the run of itself. And when you think about this for a couple of seconds, I really want to ask these questions because it's to me it seems pretty crazy. If you were to release world-changing medical information into the public domain, um, would that cause world peace, universal access, and no other consequences, or would that fully unleash chaos? As in, pharmaceutical companies out there wouldn't just lose power. I think the entire global system around pharmaceuticals would effectively go mental. Like, wouldn't you have black markets, counterfeit versions, half baked knockoffs, exploitation, corruption? People would genuinely kill for this info. Like, nations would kill for this. And would this not cause some kind of biological gold rush overnight? Giving it away kind of doesn't really fix greed, it kind of supercharges it. And the movie frames like Zora is doing a virtuous thing, but in my eyes, she's kind of throwing a nuclear grade specific breakthrough kind of into a free for all and walking away like she's got the moral high ground. And I know this is kind of a selfish thing to think about here, but if this treatment actually works the way the movie claims, Zora just threw away probably trillions. Like, this is generational wealth we're talking on a whim. And that's not just for her, that's for everyone that's involved. And maybe this is me just being a big old right wing, evil capitalist conservative, but they put the work in to do it. Why don't they decide what share of the pie they get? Sorry, I know that sounds really mean, but it's you risked your life for it, like a lot. Sorry, I'm kind of losing track of myself. Also, she hasn't secured a lab, a foundation, a medical board, and ethical oversight or anything. She just plans to give the information to everyone, but not everyone knows how to make it. Like I said previously, it's not established that countries have the infrastructure, and most labs probably won't be able to replicate the biotech of the scale, even if you can give them the exact schematic. And the moment she tells the world it came from dinosaur blood and or from what area, or people will eventually figure it out, I'm pretty sure that would inspire all the governments and corporations and anybody desperate enough to invade the island hunting for dinosaur samples. You effectively would have created a global conflict hotspot. I might be losing it here, but that's kind of seems like that would be a possibility. It just seems like all of that might be a little bit of an oversight the way the film sees it. But I'm thinking the film doesn't realize how much it's dug itself into a hole with that one choice. Because the second you bring in world changing medical resources, you kind of change the planet a bit, especially if it's something you just kind of hand out for everyone. It might make the world go a bit mental. I mean, absolutely feel free to disagree with me on this. Um, I'm not, what's the phrase I'm looking for? It's not that I'm not sure of it. It's not like I'm actually questioning, like I'm wanting a bit of a discussion on it because that's in my head how that would go down, if that makes sense. So I'm not precious about it. I want to hear disagreements or whether you agree with me, whether you even watch the video. Anyway, Primitive War kind of avoids this type of stuff entirely. It keeps its stakes very contained. It doesn't introduce some magical cure. It does introduce the magical super collider, yes. However, that does get destroyed at the end, but that also explains why the dinosaurs are there. So it doesn't create questions far bigger than the story can handle, whereas Rebirth does, and then would pretend that nothing would change with this life altering MacGuffin you've brought into it. So now I've said that. We're moving on to the next segment. At first glance, Jurassic World Rebirth and Primitive War feature very similar types of crews, a ragtag group of mercenaries or military types working alongside a scientist. On paper, the casting looks comparable, but the devil is in the details. Here's how they stack up. In Jurassic World Rebirth, the crew is mostly inconsistent and underdeveloped, while the scientist largely just observes and provides minimum utility. The film also throws in a family, not for narrative weight, but as a convenient plot device whenever the story needs to advance, create tension, or, in fact, just justify cutaways. First of all, we got the main character. We have Zora, who's the ex-Marsoc mercenary. She's played by Scarlett Johansson, which is an absolute powerhouse of an actress. Shame she isn't given any meaningful lines and inconsistent characterization, and has very little to work with. It's a very clear missed opportunity and a waste of a great actress. Supposed to be the head of the crew, mentally hardened, gets the job done type of person. Uh, she's inconsistencies go from her being sometimes a tactical genius, other times she overshares the personal details, her trauma, her PTSD diagnosis, while speaking to the scientist as if he were a child. For example, during the whole abseiling trip, if her trauma, for example, is so debilitating, arguably, then she shouldn't be in that type of mission in the first place. If she, as I said, mentions it to the scientist, she has very debilitating PTSD from a last mission due to losing people. My argument would be is maybe you should get that treated before coming out on a dangerous mission such as this. Um, Understandably, that people with PTSD can function. Yes, that is very true. However, if you were in her shoes, I would argue that it's maybe an idea to get that treated before diving into something else where you could potentially become a liability. But hey, that's just me. Anyway, talking about her tactical performance, first soldiering moment we have with her is with the Mosasaur. And after giving the scientist guy a ton of grief, she negligently, discharges her rifle, making her look amateurish. Within the military, we call this ND, and it's normally quite funny as long as no one's hurt. Anyway, emotional arc. She only breaks down after her friends are dead, and Duncan is presumably also dead when he's actually just lost. And the mission is also still active, even though they're on the ship. Bear in mind that how they ended up getting onto the island was because the Mosasaur, was tracking them and had some Spinos helping it out. So there is still a very real chance that they could be attacked again here, but she just breaks down anyway, making me think she's not the mega battle hardened mercenary type that we were led to believe in the beginning. I wouldn't say she's quite of the stage of Sergeant Forley from Tropic Thunder, but I would say it kind of almost leans towards the fact that she's kind of maybe oversold herself a little bit. But maybe I'm looking too much into it. Anyway, we then have Duncan, who's played by Marshall Ali, and his background we hear he's got a turbulent marriage, a deceased son, and he's mates with every one of the crew, but he's especially close to Zora and Leclerc. Um, he has a sacrifice himself type fake out, but he's later revealed to be alive, so he's just kind of there, I guess. His strength is he's brave at times. He does what he can to save his friend during the Mosa, Spino, and Quetzalcoatlus attacks. He's also proven to be quite observant, noticing the steps during the Quetzal stage, and he kind of just serves as really just emotional filler alongside Leclerc. He's just kind of there. Let's be honest here. Moving on to the main man himself, we have Leclerc, who's the member of the crew that doesn't speak a lick of English for some reason, and he only speaks French, which kind of kills off his integration with the team, as there's a big language barrier. Only Duncan can really understand him. And as a comparison, I'd say this has already been done better in another media. If you've ever seen that film Transformers, there's a Hispanic member of the military crew in the beginning, and this guy actually spoke English normally with his friends, but would switch to Spanish when he was talking about something he was passionate about. For example, food and his mum's barbecue, showing his personality and cultural grounding. But Leclerc sadly doesn't really have any of that. Leclerc does have his moment where he's brave, distracting the Quetzal, but that ends up with his life being taken, and no one really kind of cares about it after, which is really quite sad. Moving on to the scientist, the first of the non-military crew, his motivation is to see dinosaurs free and wild and also revive his museum's reputation. His competences are he's a dino behavioral expert. He's, let's be real here, he's largely irrelevant within the story, provides little tactical info, and the team could very much succeed without him, which is why I say he's kind of irrelevant. The only other role he serves there is to be minimum comedic relief by chewing tons of mints at awkward times. Don't really know what other kind of role he serves within the team because, like I mentioned before, they could have very much done that mission without him. He just happens to be there. He doesn't really bounce off the characters very well. He's kind of a sharing tool for Zora. I don't really know much else. I think it's a bit of a mixed beat when I describe the next character, which is Ajax. And I don't actually know the name of this character. I just know him as Ajax from Deadpool or Francis. But he represents kind of preemptive practical survival logic. He has the gun that kills the dinosaurs, and killing dinosaurs is necessary if it means survival. So should he have survived further than the Spinosaur attack, I think he could have been a good moral sparring partner with the scientist, exploring the ethics of killing intelligent creatures versus survival. But he's killed almost immediately, which kind of squanders a great opportunity for the pair of them to have some character-driven tension, whereas one thinks that killing a dinosaur for your survival is a necessary evil, whilst the other one thinks it's abhorrent either way. And that could have been a good bit where they bounce off each other. Aside from that, we got some red shirts, which kind of just really serve as dino fodder. We've got the woman with, I think she has a jellyfish tattoo, but she kind of is destroyed by a Spino almost instantly as well. So she's a red shirt alongside Ajax and is largely irrelevant to the story. She's just kind of there and survives and dies because she doesn't notice a large Spino. Moving on to the other characters, which are totally different to the ones in Primitive War. This is the only other add-in. Is we have the family. So the dad, he's very passive. He has a wounded leg, and he's very much just plot fodder with plot armor, which is quite weird. We have Xavier, who's the other standout in that group. Daughter's boyfriend. He tries to smuggle weed on the island and openly talks about smoking weed in a survival situation. Survives ridiculous scenarios. Has zero arc aside from his one time when he's brave, and everyone kind of wishes he was dead the whole way through the movie, but it never happens. So Xavier survives everything. The older daughter, who's the teenage kind of rebellious trope, only dating Xavier to piss off her dad. I can't really see another discernible reason apart from the kid's a good looking lad. And that gets hinted at strongly by the film. The guy literally steals sweeties from his younger sister, sorry, from her younger sister, and the dad, being the passive dickhead, does nothing about it. Anyway, speaking of the little girl, we have the token child, and she's the emotional stakes, is friends with some weird mutant dino. I don't know if that is actually meant to be based on another dinosaur. If it is, I've totally forgotten the name of it. Probably begins with an L. But she's there and survives impossible odds. So the critique of the family is they survive impossible events. It's either via luck or plot armor. They're largely indifferent to the mercenary group are largely indifferent to friends being savagely eaten, which kind of kills off the emotional stakes as well. Finally, we move on to the villain, which is probably one of the worst characters, is that initially a cautious businessman, his one villainous act is letting the teenage girl from the family slip into the boat, which could be arguably quite rational considering the amount of risk involved. His villain reveal is late in the story and pretty arbitrary. Could have been any character that was the villain. For example, the dad could have been the villain for not jumping in the water fast enough to save his children. Zora could have been the villain if she's not willing to hand out the dinosaur anti-heart disease stuff. And anyone really could have been the villain here. It just so happened that he had one moment that could have been considered pretty villainous, and it suddenly got taken away. My overall assessment within the Rebirth characters is the cast is pretty bloated. Many characters serve little narrative purpose. Heroics and moral decisions are pretty inconsistent, along with skill levels. Survival depends on luck, miracles, or straight up coincidence. Characters' actions often contradict established traits. For example, we have Zora openly talking about her PTSD and then acting totally normal. We also have her shown as this kind of martial out badass despite NDing when she's fighting the Moza. As I mentioned before, Zora overshares her trauma. Ajax had a very much wasted potential for a compelling moral dynamic between himself and Henry the scientist. Emotional stakes are weakened by characters' indifference to their friends being eaten. For example, no one cared Leclerc died after sacrificing himself. No one cared about Ajax dying after being eaten on the boat. No one cared about the jellyfish tattoo woman being eaten by the Spino, despite it happening straight in front of them. They're all laughing and smiling in the field with the Titanosaur. The family exists as well, mainly as a convenient narrative crutch rather than any kind of meaningful participants. As previously mentioned to the slightly trained eye, Primitive War shares a similar crew setup with Jurassic World Rebirth. It's basically a ragtag team of soldiers paired with a scientist, but the execution is entirely different. Each character feels grounded, their motivations clear, and their actions have consequences. Also, editor's note, I did notice that with the family within Rebirth also is similar to the group of Russians with the Vietnamese women within Primitive War, but I'll get into later detail on how those two groups sort of gel together in the end as well, and how it's different to Rebirth also. So there's me again, not protecting my darlings. But anyway, here we go. First off, we have Baker, who's the leader. This man's a former morphine addict, though this isn't explored in detail within the film, from what I remember. However, it is in the book. He serves as the main anchor and leader of the group, keeping everyone grounded, ensuring everyone survives, and making decisive leadership choices. His respect is earned, unlike Zora's. He doesn't overshare his personal trauma, and he very much leads by example. He's willing to get his hands dirty, risk everything to save his friends, which is demonstrated in the finale. There's also a soft side on him. On the boat, he talks about completing the mission because of the super collider. Explain that if destroyed, it could be catastrophic, and he jokes saying that the hydrogen bomb would look like one of Eli lighting one of his farts. This is a more light-hearted moment in a very serious movie, and it is meant to boost morale for his team. And maybe it's just from my own viewpoint, I didn't think this was to make the audience laugh. I think this was to try and boost the spirits of his crew after suffering a devastating loss. This shows his compassion and judgment in the moment, and he also stops Logan from taking his own life, which indirectly also honors Keyes' decision. And he honors his Keyes' decision to go out on his own terms after being brutally mauled by the Utahraptor, which is balancing more responsibility with actual practicality. There's several dynamics within the story that very much could merit themselves their own video, but I'm just going to squeeze them in here. If you want more detail, then by all means chuck it into the comments and I'll do my very utmost. I mean, if anyone actually watches this video, just stop talking myself down, honestly. Anyway, so let's discuss Logan and Keyes, which is the sniper crew within Vulture Squad, and you could argue is also the heart. So we have Keyes, which is the morale anchor, or the moral anchor. Well, not the moral anchor, but certainly the morale one. Keyes is the life and energy of the group, and they nickname him earlier in the beginning as Santa Claus of the Vulture Squad. Every time he's around, the mood automatically lifts. He has a playful side, giving out gifts, for example. When the new guy is offered a choice between chocolate or dirty magazines, Keyes jokes once the new guy picks the chocolate, he says it's absolutely the wrong choice and throws the dirty content at him anyway, whilst giving Logan chocolate, respecting his more serious, introspective nature. And despite the jovial personality Keyes has, he's also incredibly tough and determined. After taking a bullet to the leg, he still stands and fights off a group of Deinonychus with only a machete and a knife. And even after being mauled by the Utahraptor, he jams a blade into its eye, a feat that demonstrates wholeheartedly extraordinary amounts of resilience and determination. When he eventually dies, the team loses their emotional center. The loss of morale is palpable on the boat as his humor, guidance, and protective presence are no longer there. His humor, I would say, is for pretty much the entire group, where protective over Logan and being his emotional anchor is completely gone. I also want to mention the fact that Keyes does make a point about Logan going to see someone after all said and done, because he genuinely worries about him. Moving on, let's talk about Logan. He is our emotionally damaged sniper, and he's extremely competent within combat and a sniper of incredibly terrifying skill. However, the Vulture Squad knows he has a kind of almost childlike vulnerable side, which Keyes in fact nurtures. By giving him chocolate instead of adult content, Key subtly reinforces their bond, showing that he sees Logan as a younger brother figure, despite Logan's very much lethal skill. Also, want to say as well, this kind of does lean into the more childlike things that, well, childlike qualities that Logan possesses. Because obviously, you would give another bloke the dirty content, whereas you'd more likely give a child the chocolate candy bar, American already, the chocolate bar, because that would be a gift you would give a child. You wouldn't give a child adult content unless you were a weirdo. Um, Logan's mentality is visible after, mental fragility is visible after missions, whereas sometimes he has many freakouts. For example, he has it on the stand where he needs time to regain his composure, and his loyalty to Keyes is central. He's deeply affected by Keyes' sacrifice, and his willingness to risk himself later demonstrates their emotional interdependence. Looking further into the dynamic of the two, Keyes and Logan are pretty much polar opposites. Keyes is outgoing, he's playful, he's socially adept. Logan is serious and introspective and psychologically fragile. Yet their bond is one of mutual reliance. Logan grounds his Keyes emotionally during high stress situations, while Keyes humanizes Logan and offers him emotional support. To outsiders or enemies, Logan would just be another terrifying sniper. To Keyes and the squad, he's complex, he's vulnerable, he's a dangerous fighter who still needs the emotional connection that Keyes provides. The impact on the squad from Keyes' death is not just a personal loss for Logan, it's a complete shift in the squad's emotional equilibrium. His humor, his guidance, and protective presence completely vanish, leaving the team very much shocked and vulnerable. This dynamic balance, loyalty, vulnerability, and toughness makes the Vulture Squad feel, well, earned. They feel real and deeply human, which is a contrast to the other groups in a similar ragtag military plus scientist scenarios where character and emotional cohesion is absolutely neglected. Moving on to other characters, there's a pair within there you don't fully realize are damned until the end. Charlie Miller and Eli Taylor. On the surface, they're best friends bonded through a horrific experience long before the events of the film. Both have seen unimaginable things together and carry the scars, psychological, moral, and spiritual of that past. They cope in completely different ways. Miller has turned to religion, deeply worried about the state of his soul. He carries prayer beads everywhere and leans on his faith as a moral anchor, constantly aware of the consequences of his past actions. Eli, by contrast, doesn't believe in God or hell, but knows his soul is irrevocably damaged. He drowns that weight in alcohol, using it as a shield to numb the trauma he can't escape. Within the squad, Eli is the UGL operator, wielding grenades on the end of his rifle, bringing firepower and practical expertise to the team. Miller, while less clearly defined in terms of combat speciality, is an incredibly competent member in his own right. Together they balance each other. Eli's pragmatism and lethal skills paired with Miller's calm and morally guided competence. The tragedy of these two is how their damned status defines their story arc. Both are haunted by past events, both carry immense guilt, and by the end their faces reflect their weight. They're not just casualties, they're a mirror of how trauma shapes survival, morality, and human connection under extreme circumstances. I also want to talk a bit deeper about Charlie Miller, is that as he was a former cavalry scout alongside Eli, is that he's the only one that actually does see real world consequences of his actions spring up in the final chapter of the film. As the Vietnamese woman traveling with the Russians, we don't actually realize her significance until she comes face to face with Charlie. Now, it is believed that she is a surviving girl from one of Charlie's attacks, and this obviously involved his squad with Eli. Basically, what happened is his squad were doing village hopping, and a sergeant sprinted out of a hut claiming that the entire village was VC. This caused an absolute massacre, and one of the few survivors was a 6-year-old Vietnamese girl that remembered Charlie Miller's face as the man that killed her mother and rest of her family. Whether or not this was the exact same little girl remains to be seen, or if she was just imprinting upon Charlie as seeing an American soldier and going a bit crazy, isn't fully explored. It could very well be the case that they are exactly who the other thinks they are, and they end up dying together, one unable to let go of their grief, and the other turning to religion to let go of their grief. Either way, they both end up dying together. So, you know, I will say one critique is that we don't really understand what the pair have been through until the very, very end. And then again, it's only kind of briefly given in a short flashback. Bear in mind, I've only seen this film once, so I'd have to give deeper analysis once I'm able to watch it again. However, we do get a rough idea of something happened involving Miller and Eli, which makes them the way they are. So, with one mild critique that we don't get more build up. However, the film is already 2.5 hours long, and I think that would be a backstory movie within itself, personally. So, yeah, I've still got a nitpick on that because it is a valid criticism. Next up, we have Sergeant Xavier, the second in command of the Vulture Squad. He kind of functions as the father figure of the group. He's very stoic, he's composed, and someone everyone can rely on for solid advice. He doesn't really get a lot of screen time during the movie, but the moments we see him are pretty telling. In the early village sequence, he's clearly dangerous, showing that he's not someone you'd want to come up against. Later, he gives the new guy Leon practical and experienced tips. For example, you can't fit something in your pocket, don't bother carrying it. The same way he mentions that ponchos are too noisy to take in the field, and above all, the machete is essential bit of kit. This last one is a setup. Is set up early and pays off later when Xavier uses it to decapitate Utahraptors in the finale. A perfect example of foreshadowing and now payoff. He also has a slight African twang when speaking, but otherwise the character doesn't really get much more exposition. That said, his rank and role show he's highly competent, promoted above his peers, and trusted as Baker's right-hand man. Xavier may not be the focus of the story, but every action that he takes demonstrates his reliability and deadly efficiency within the field. Finally, within the Vulture Squad, we have Leon. He's the newest member. He's inexperienced, he's curious, and isn't afraid to talk back, sometimes to his own detriment. Early on, he asks a lot of questions that higher ranking members like Baker and even Colonel Jericho tell him to shut the fuck up. But this actually gives us, the audience, an insight into the world and the missions. Essentially, he kind of functions also almost as a bit of a voice of the audience, asking all the questions that we would want answered. Being paired with Baker allows us to see different sides of his personality. Over time, Leon proves he's more than just a rookie. He becomes a competent, capable member of the group. He makes smart decisions in high-pressure situations, shows initiative, and earns his place as one of the survivors. By the end, he's fully validated as a competent part of the crew, showing that the new guy can hold his own even in the chaos surrounding the Vulture Squad. Okay, that's the members of Vulture Squad put to bed. Now we have Colonel Jericho. We don't actually see much of him within the movie, but we do get glimpses that immediately tell us he's a bit of an arrogant prick. Early on, he keeps a tiger as a pet, claiming that an alpha male would respect another alpha male. This isn't just showmanship here. It's a clear signal that Jericho is a man who wants to control the uncontrollable. The tiger serves as a metaphor for him. Within its disciplined and powerful nature, it is also dangerous if it's not respected. But it also makes it super obvious that he intends to keep the super collider intact for America's uses. And when he finds out about the dinosaurs, it's easy to imagine that he'd want to control them also, because anything powerful and untamed is something that he sees as his responsibility or asset to master. Jericho comes across not necessarily as the villain, but as a partially antagonistic force. He puts the Vulture Squad in incredibly dangerous situations while still maintaining the authority of an American officer. He's a competent leader, yes, but sometimes he is also short-sighted. He gets annoyed when Baker disobeys him, and when Leon, the new lad, asks questions that slow things down. The experienced members of the squad show very realistic reactions here, kicking Leon's chair, exclaiming, fucking new guy, whenever he asks something obvious or unfortunate question. To me, this shows that they basically just want to chill out before the next mission, and they know the score, they know the crack, so this is all very much a moot point for them. Anyway, Jericho is the worst kind of competent prick. I did say competent there, by the way. He can lead effectively, but he's also inflexible and arrogant. Despite this, he isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. In the finale, once the dinosaurs arrived, he immediately grabs a weapon and fights alongside the crew. He even coordinated briefly with the SOG CIA guys, whatever the plainclothes tourists are. who get about 5 seconds of screen time before the Raptors take him out in the finale. But it reinforces that Jericho isn't a bureaucratic arsehole. He actually can act under pressure when it matters. Next up, we have Sophia Wagner. She is the Russian scientist. At first, Sophia doesn't trust the squad 1%. She views the Vulture Squad as enemies, or at least outsiders, and refuses to share important information with Baker or the rest. This distrust is rooted in fear among self-preservation and probably guilt over what she's been involved in. On top of that, she's coming off a very serious morphine addiction, which we can see. She grabs morphine from the operating table even when Keyes is critically injured. That does say a lot about her addicted state of mind. Despite her flaws, she does also prove to be essential for the squad's survival many times. For example, she explains why the T-Rexes stopped chasing Baker and Leon after they fell off the cliff. The T-Rex is disorientated and focused on getting back to its mate and babies, no longer chasing its next meal. That reasoning saves them from another fatal confrontation, or at least provides reason why the T-Rex is now suddenly no longer chasing them when it was very, very determined about it earlier. Oh crap, I dropped my phone. Also, during a pack attack of Deinonychuses, pack attack, she warns the group that not just to watch the ground, but the trees as well, because these dromaeosaurs can ambush from above. That insight gives the team a much better chance to defend themselves. She also helps guide the rescue plan for Keyes after the Deinonychuses have dragged him away. This gives important intel of where the small dinosaurs are taking them to, enabling them to launch a realistic rescue strategy instead of just going out at random. More than just a survivalist, she also understands what's going on at a global level. She knows about the super collider, particle collider, whatever you want to call it, that caused the dino outbreak. She warns that if the device isn't properly disabled, specifically that the collider must be physically unplugged, and reactivating it could have catastrophic consequences, the same way destroying it could have catastrophic consequences. She also reveals that she's got personal beef with the bad guy, the scientist, General something, who is backing the collider. He also killed her husband and some of her colleagues, and the betrayal fuels her motivation to help the rest of the squad. After seeing the squad risk everything to save a mortally wounded comrade, which was Keyes, Sophia changes her stance. Her initial distrust turns into solidarity. She abandons her isolation, ceding valuable information and cooperating fully, which shows her character growth. She moves from survival mode to pretty much moral commitment. Her past addiction and guilt give her a bit of a haunted edge. She's not a really clean-cut hero, but that does kind of make her more human, more flawed, and a hell of a lot more interesting. Her trauma and willingness to repeatedly claim redemption add to depth of the film's character-driven horror. Also, without Sophia, the Vulture Squad is just another group of soldiers stumbling about in the dark. Well, once they're able to get themselves into any kind of extraction, but with her, they have more direction and a shot at stopping the root cause. She shows that in the film. Not everyone's strength comes from beating a soldier with a gun, even though she does get involved in the shootout. She also uses her brain to help her survive. She understands a lot of the behavior of the dinosaurs, which does in fact come in useful. And her arc goes from an addicted, mistrustful survivor to someone who is willing to sacrifice everything so the future and possibly the whole world isn't destroyed. It's one of the few arcs in the films that absolutely feels earned. And if we're paralleling it to Rebirth, is that Sophia is actually a useful character, whereas Henry, the Rebirth scientist, is just kind of there to chew mints and touch up a Titanosaur's leg. So if I was stuck with any of these characters, even though Sophia has got a very severe opium addiction, I would still pick her because she knows what's going on. And even though she's less easy on the eye. Finally, we have the other supporting group. which is the Russians and the Vietnamese woman. These characters kind of function as Primitive War's version of the random family from Rebirth, but one key difference is they actually take casualties. One is their head bitten open by the Utahraptor, another is viciously killed by the Quetzal, and one dies due to personal beef with Charlie Miller. The remaining two eventually swap sides, with at least one of them making it out alive. I don't really remember. They also contribute to major action beats, such as shooting Keys in the leg and during the Quetzal scene. They also don't overstay their welcome when you see them. They're largely there to populate the dangerous environment, add stakes, create realistic consequences for the lethal situation. Overall, they're competent, functional, and relevant to the action, but they don't also pull focus and dominate the narrative. I'm kind of ambivalent to them, but they're effective within their role. I also do want to mention that following these characters, you also do get a little bit of screen time with the main bad guy before he is further introduced. So, you know, they play their role in the large picture. Before I start this next bit, I want to sincerely apologize. My rabbit currently has the zoomies and is tearing the crap out of a cardboard box. So any kind of scraping, ripping, and fumbling is entirely on the fact that I own a long-eared stapler. Without further ado, the self-sacrifice in Primitive War, a lot of it does seem pretty repetitive, but I'm going to point out that it is the same mechanism, but there is a different meaning behind it. So one of the things Primitive War does intentionally or not is repeat the same basic death mechanism multiple times. A character knowingly causes their own death to protect others. On paper, that does sound pretty stale. In execution, it actually isn't, because each sacrifice is recontextualized through character, their circumstances, and even their psychology. So first up, we got Keys, who is his sacrifice is practical. So Keys is the first one and the cleanest example of self-sacrifice within the film. For example, he's severely wounded. He's been shot in the leg, and he's also been disemboweled by a Utahraptor. And the team is actively being hunted by Cyclops and the rest of the Utahraptors. So at this point, Keys clearly understands he's already dead. The only variable is how many of his friends are going to die with him. So when he chooses to stay behind with the grenades and decides to, well, obviously, this isn't despair or theatrics. It's pretty much pure pragmatism. He's sacrificed himself because he understands he refuses to be a burden. He knows moving him will end up slowing the rest of the squad down. He understands that hesitation will get more of his friends killed. And this is very much a soldier sacrifice. It's clean, it's logical, and it's really grimly professional. So there's no spiritual framing here, there's no grand speech. It's just a guy choosing to make his death useful, and his friends honor it as well. For example, Baker says the man's made his choice because, understandably, one of the characters, I believe it's Logan, doesn't want to let his best friend, doesn't want to leave him behind to be potentially torn apart by prehistoric reptiles, but eventually relents after realizing that it's what he wants to do. Next up, we got Logan. His is very much a psychological sacrifice. Now, Logan's looks on the surface to be incredibly similar, but it comes from a completely different place. Unlike Keys, Logan is physically incapable of continuing. So, what he can't survive is what's happening in his head. Now, Keys to Logan was his closest friend, and effectively his emotional anchor, and really the one person that he could actually open up and speak to. After Keys dies, Logan doesn't just lose a teammate, he loses the last connection he has to normality. We see this explicitly when he's suicidal on the boat. He puts his rifle under his chin, and Baker physically has to stop him. So when Logan later draws the Deinonychus horde away from the squad and, well, puts a bullet in himself, this isn't about injury or inevitability. It's Logan's effectively cornered by his own mind, not his body. His sacrifice effectively is an act of despair. It's an attempt to give his death meaning, and it's directly inspired by Keys' choice. Where where Keys chooses to die because he has to, Logan chooses to die because he can't keep on living, but refuses to let that death be meaningless. Once again, same mechanism, but completely different emotional engine. Next up, we got Baker, who's the leadership sacrifice, and his is probably the most traditional, but it's also the most grounded. Um, on the surface, Baker, he is the leader. He's responsible for every man under his command. He's already emotionally broken by watching Eli die, begging, "Don't let me die," and he can't really do anything about it. So when Baker chooses to stay behind to draw away the Utahraptors, it isn't framed as some kind of heroism or destiny. It's kind of framed as duty taken to its absolute endpoint. His motivation isn't really saving the world. I mean, they've already done that. It's not behind destroying the collider or uh, even survival. It's one thing, and he says it out loud: "You're not getting any more of my men." Baker's death is the commander sacrifice, the kind that only exists because he's already internalized every previous loss at this point. And you can see that in his final seconds is that he's thinking of all of his squad mates. So it's once again, it's the same act but different weight behind it. Now, Charlie Miller is kind of an atonement. As I mentioned earlier, him and Eli were the damned pair as they had to go through something absolutely traumatic. So they were kind of haunted by their previous actions. Eli turned to alcohol, which is the correct way, and Charlie turned to religion, which is another way. I'm joking. So Charlie's death. I had a bit of a disagreement with myself on this, but I'm gonna say it's the most ambiguous and arguably potentially the most interesting. So unlike the others, Charlie's sacrifice isn't clean nor decisive. What happens to him is he's attacked whilst planting explosives. He's stabbed repeatedly. He actively seeks forgiveness from the Almighty and has flashbacks to the village massacre. He still shows a lot of self-preservation instincts before detonating. So Charlie effectively isn't trying to escape death, but he isn't trying to survive either. It's kind of bizarre. What he's trying to do is make sense of his guilt. So his faith, his prayer beads, his obsession with God, all of it kind of leads here. When Charlie pulls his detonator, it doesn't feel like heroism or despair. It kind of oddly kind of feels like atonement. He doesn't believe he deserves to live, but he desperately kind of wants his death to mean something and hopefully gain some kind of redemption out of it. That's why, to me, his sacrifice feels uneasy. It isn't resignation, it isn't duty, it isn't despair. It's a man who's trying to balance his past sins, his present violence, and the belief that redemption must cost him everything. And why these work despite the repetition is, yeah, Primitive War repeats the same mechanism 4 times, but each time the reason for the sacrifice changes. Keyes is practicality, Logan is psychological collapse, Baker is leadership responsibility, Charlie is guilt and atonement. The film doesn't pretend these men are the same. They die the same way, but they die for different reasons. And that's why, even when it risks repetition, it doesn't really feel hollow. As I just realized while reading the script, I did miss a part on Charlie. Um, as him and Eli, they're both cavalry scouts doing village hopping, and it is shown in his dying act that Charlie has actually been carrying a big emotional weight, and you finally it gets revealed to you. The woman that is attacking him in the end believes that he is someone that has done something absolutely terrible to her village or her family. And as Charlie has absolutely got previous in that, I think he kind of realizes what this potentially could be about. Whether or not this is the exact child from one of his village hopping missions where they slaughtered a village believing them to be VC is, well, it's still murky. It could in fact be the exact child he's after, or sorry, the could be the exact child he thinks it is, or it could be all she sees is a uniform and is just going for it 100%. I mean, both of these things could be true at the same time, but either way, Charlie, goes for atonement instead of trying to live another day. There is also an element of survivability in this, is when both of them realize a T-Rex is pretty much on top of them. They both decide to crawl under a vehicle instead of letting it take them both, which people that don't want to be on this planet anymore would likely do. But Charlie decides he wants to live a bit longer, and his final words about 200 times are "forgive me," which is really, really quite sad. Sad in the upsetting sense, not in any others. Bye. That's final words on Charlie. His is at first I didn't think his death was in fact a self-sacrifice, but on a bit of revision, I realized it was. It was just a kind of different flavor. So yeah, he makes onto that list once again, recontextualized like the others. To finally summarize again, if I'm going to talk about self-sacrifice in the films, then Primitive War and Jurassic World Rebirth couldn't be further apart in how they handle it. In Primitive War, as I've mentioned before, we get 4 self-sacrifices. You could absolutely criticize them on a mechanical level, same basic method, repeated multiple times, and I'm going to have to agree with you that criticism would absolutely be fair. But the difference is that Primitive War recontextualizes the same mechanism every single time. Key sacrifices himself because he's mortally wounded and refuses to be a burden. Logan sacrifices himself because his mental state has collapsed and he sees no meaning in choosing his end. Baker sacrificed himself as a leader who refuses to let the dinosaurs take another one of his boys. And Charlie Miller, who I've honestly came around on, sacrificed himself as an act of atonement, guilt, faith, and consequences colliding into one final decision. So, like I said again, same mechanism, 4 different emotional, thematic meanings. Now, compare that to Duncan in Rebirth, or more accurately, sorry, is Duncan's attempted self-sacrifice. Because here's the problem: is there's no real build up to it. Duncan is introduced as happy, he's laughing, he's charismatic, the guy who can get you into places nobody else really can. He jokes around constantly. He doesn't brood. He doesn't act haunted, and crucially, he doesn't display the kind of internal tension that would make a self-sacrifice decision feel really inevitable. Yes, we are told that his son has died, and we are told his relationship with his wife is strained. However, these are background facts, not real dramatized motivations. If Duncan were headed toward a sacrificial end, the film needed to show us that trajectory, really. For example, if we had more scenes with a child, that would be a kind of surrogate father dynamic. If we had him visibly uncomfortable around children, that could be another reason, or a sense that he's reckless because he doesn't care if he lives or dies, or conversely, a protector instinct kicking in because he's failed once already. But none of that is actually here. Instead, we see a man living a high risk, high reward lifestyle, dangerous work, probably making big money. He's got no children, no clear anchor, and he seems to want constant adrenaline. And honestly, that kind of character could be easily be selfish, hedonistic, or thrill seeking, not exactly self sacrificing. Sex, money, danger, freedom, that's a very different psychological profile from someone who's ready to die for others. Film never really commits to which version that Duncan is. So when he finally decides he's willing to give up his life, it doesn't really feel tragic. It feels arbitrary. And that's the real difference. In Primitive War, the sacrifice feels like the logical endpoint of these men and what they've endured. In Rebirth, Duncan's moment feels like screenwriting checkbox. For example, we needed to put a big emotional beat here. And because this franchise has a massive budget, massive stars, and decades of goodwill, and yet it still delivers a character moment that feels, well, kind of out of place in a big budget movie, and done a whole lot worse in the low budget war dinosaur hybrid, which is Primitive War. And to be honest, it's just kind of poorly done. And it makes it even worse that he ends up surviving in the end. In the spirit of offering my own ideas to criticize instead of just being a cynical arsehole, which I am, by the way, I don't care. Come get me. If I was to rewrite Rebirth and had to have the family and the ragtag mercenaries plus the museum gentleman on the island, I would have had the father after his leg injury get killed, and Marshall Ali would kind of take over the fathering role for the young girl, and that's what brings up his inevitable sacrifice. So during the scene where the D-Rex is about to kill the little girl during the door scene, that's when I would have added it. And it would have probably had a bit more weight behind it then, as you see Marshall Ali, who has lost his children or lost his child and doesn't really have much to live for, is finally imprinting again on another child who you could potentially have that kind of protective nature over, and all those feelings kind of come up again because he refuses to let another child die under his watch. That could also make sense, but unfortunately, that isn't what happens. So that's what I would do in that position. So you can criticize that if you want to talk shit on me as well. Within this next one, I want to discuss the horror versus the comedy logic. This is where the tonal difference between Primitive War and Rebirth becomes very difficult to ignore. So these two scenes on paper are doing the same narrative job. I'll describe them briefly before going into greater detail. So we have Xavier on the right and Keys on the left. Both of these men are taken away from the rest of the group, either by choice or not by choice. And they have a dinosaur attacking them and then is chased away by a different dinosaur. The result for both men is incredibly different. So, first off, we have Keys and him lighting a cigarette. So, within Primitive War, Keys has just fought off a group of Deinonychus. They scatter because something bigger has entered the area. Keys at this moment assumes that the danger has passed. And this is the key point, that assumption is completely reasonable. Right now, he's injured, he's exhausted, he's probably in shock, and he's running on adrenaline. So he does something very, very human. He lights a cigarette, and that's when the real predator gets him. He isn't punished for being stupid. He's punished for being momentarily human in a hostile environment. And the escalation makes a lot of sense. Small predator's free, and the apex predator takes advantage. The mistake he makes isn't necessarily arrogance, it's incomplete information. And the result is absolutely fucking horrific. It's sudden and it's very much cruel. And this is how a jungle ambush should, in fact, feel. The film treats the dinosaurs as real threats, not props. So, next up, we have Xavier taking the piss or going for a piss. Now, compare that to what I've previously talked about to Jurassic World. Is Xavier is the only full able-bodied male in the group, and he decides to wander a good middle earth distance from everybody else to go for a piss. Not 5 meters away, not just behind cover, but far enough that the camera has time to frame a whole suspense sequence. So during his piss, a raptor is silently stalking him. So by far this could work, except then a mutadon drops from a tree, killing the raptor instantly. And the entire moment is played for there's always a bigger fish type gag, and the tension completely just collapses. What should have been a fatal decision is kind of reframed as a joke. And what's worse is it saves him. So, why I chose to chuck in this comparison is Keys doesn't choose to be dragged away. He didn't choose to get a bullet in the leg. He didn't choose to be wounded. There's his only one mistake was was not assuming there's always something far worse, which is totally believable because looking at the guy's face, he already seems pretty pissed off by the time he's reaching for his cigarettes. Xavier, on the other hand, he leaves the group for near enough no reason in an active survival situation whilst being the group's only functional protector or only functional worker, and survives not because of his skill, but because the film needs him to survive. If a raptor creeps up on you while your pants are effectively down, you're distracted, you're alone, you're dead. There's no time to run, there's no time to turn around, there's no time for cinematic save. And Rebirth doesn't understand that. Primitive War does. And the tone is also very, very different here. In Primitive War, the dinosaurs are predators. Mistakes are very nearly fatal every time. Survival is earned and horror is very much respected. In Rebirth, dinosaurs are the punchline. Danger is very much selective. Characters survive because the script needs them to, and threats exist to reset a scene. Keys' scene leans into horror and inevitability, whereas Xavier leans into relief and comedy. That's not relief as he's pissing himself, as in relief as he's saved, all right? Even the situation absolutely shouldn't allow it. And once you stop treating your antagonists or your dangers with no respect, they stop being antagonists. They just kind of become tools or background scenery. Finally, I want to touch on how each character got out of their respective situation. Xavier wasn't really in a situation because it all got solved without any of his input. Keys, well, If you've seen the film, you already know. But it takes a momentary distraction of his group coming nearby for the Utahraptor to turn its focus slightly away from him, only for Keys to have a bust of strength and jam a knife so hard into his eye, I guarantee that broke his wrist. I know it didn't break his wrist, but you know what I'm trying to say. So how they got out of it is by using his own competence and by the luck of his group being nearby, which they absolutely would be searching for him in the direction he was dragged. However, Xavier, the situation just kind of happens around him, and he's very much saved by the movie with time enough for the audience to have a mini chuckle at it.
Next up, we got the T-Rex scenarios. One's treated like a threat, the other one's kind of just treated like doing whitewater rapids, but with a Tyrannosaur. So this one's actually a lot more egregious. We've got the T-Rex scenes. Now, let me be clear, I love me a good T-Rex scene, and I always have. And honestly, Jurassic World's Rebirth T-Rex scene is actually probably the best Predator scene in the whole film, which is not really a compliment when I think about it for more than a minute. I could probably make an entire video comparing this scene to the T-Rex raft scene from the books and how the pair of them stack up, but this video is already running long and I'm genuinely considering doing a part 2. So for now, we're just going with comparisons between Rebirth and Primitive War. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Primitive War, escaping the T-Rex in this scenario does kind of feel earned, but I'm going to give the asterisk. So Baker and Leon don't just get away from the Rex. They're fully running for their lives. They have to use terrain. They have to hide behind fallen logs. They break line of sight and exploit momentary confusion. Nothing about this feels particularly easy. And Baker makes a decision to throw a grenade. And this is important as it's not designed to kill a T-Rex, but effectively buys them time. So the grenade, don't know if you've ever been in vicinity when one's been thrown, but they are fucking deafening. And if one explodes near enough to you and it doesn't kill you, there is a damn good chance that you'll be disorientated. And there is another damn good chance that if it didn't kill you and disorientated you and didn't injure you, there's a damn good chance it would piss you off a lot. And that's exactly what happens. The grenade doesn't actually solve their problem, but it does give them a minute to escape. But it does also annoy the Rex enough to carry on chasing them, but that was happening anyway, so who cares? I would say that's actually some pretty smart writing, and as a lesser movie would have just had them jump off the cliff, but this also makes sense contextually, as this is Vietnam era soldiers and they're special operations soldiers that absolutely have grenades on them, so they're using the tools they would realistically have. When it comes to them jumping off the cliff, bear in mind that the grenade tactic doesn't actually end their escape, it gives them distance between them and the Rex. So when they end up at the cliff edge, the T-Rex is pretty much locked onto them, is now bearing down on them. Baker turns to Leon and asks, "Are you airborne trained?" This is about as close as Primitive War gets to any form of humor, and it works because it's kind of gallows humor. They jump, it's pretty desperate, reckless, and it's the only option they have left. And it ends with them just narrowly avoiding the snap of the T-Rex's jaws. And in this moment, when they're over the cliff, the T-Rex follows them into the water, which is already a pretty horrifying image. And as I mentioned before, as far as it gets to humor, Baker also remarks is, yep, they can swim. Eventually, they encounter the scientist on the beach who explains that the T-Rex, even though she didn't know it was grenaded, it is now disorientated. It's probably injured and stressed from the fall, but is now more concerned with finding its mate than it is with them. However, they should still exercise caution. Now, to be fair, this does feel a bit convenient, and it did for me the first time I watched it. So, yeah, I love Primitive War, but I'm going to deduct some points for this because, yeah, sorry. It does actually matter. The film does explain it, but the Rex doesn't just suddenly stop because the plot says so. It stops because it's hurt, it's confused, and it's reassessing its priorities. I may not love this bit, I'm going to be honest, but at least it respects the audience enough to justify it, if that makes sense. I'm still going to deduct points from it, but I'm not fully condemning the film for saving its characters via plot, if that makes sense. Okay, cool. Next up, we got Rebirth. So we have the raft scene in this. The T-Rex basically does exactly what it does in the book. It swims like a crocodile, and perhaps the biggest crocodile you've ever seen, just like it's described in the books. And from that point on, eternal logic kind of collapses. Like I say, I'm going to dive into a deeper detail if I find the time within another video where this stacks up with the book Jurassic Park. But there are multiple moments within this that the character should have, yeah, thank you, should have died, and there's no real debate or interpretation on it. So, first character that should have bit the dust here is the dad. At one point, you can see pictured on the right here, the Rex has its head in the water, staring directly at the father as he floats towards it in the rapids. This isn't refraction, it's not concealment, and he's also a moving object, and the T-Rex is locked onto him. What I mean by refraction is if the Rex was above the water, there's a good chance that he would see the father in a different area due to the light bending, but that isn't the case when the T-Rex has its head inside the water. So if it can see him, which the film clearly shows, he should be dead. There's no real explanation of how he survives in this moment. And bear in mind, he also has an injured leg. So, yes, adrenaline is a thing. So he'd be moving and doing whatever he can to preserve his life. But he would still end up getting caught here. If the Rex turned its head sideways, which it most likely would do, he's done. And if it's going to copy animal behavior, like, for example, crocodiles, if you ever see them at certain rapids, they just sit there with their mouths open and fish swim straight into them. So there is a good chance it would adopt this tactic, but somehow the father gets through this. All right, cool. His young daughter, sadly, she should also be dead at this point. It does get significantly worse from here. So after the raft is flipped, obviously, the wee girl is trapped underneath and the Rex is actively biting the raft. She somehow slips free. She survives. I genuinely don't know how, because even if the teeth didn't get her, the amount of crush involved in a T-Rex's jaws should have been enough to, well, give a bit of a constriction effect. And the T-Rex randomly decides it's had enough, not because it's injured or disorientated or looking for its mate that it's just been separated from. It stops because two large rocky pillars are in the river. So instead of reassessing, walking backwards or pushing through, climbing over or anything, for lack of a better phrase, it just kind of fucks off and calls it a day. And after all that, the final result is after the T-Rex has had its teeth in the inflatable raft, it then just pops up totally intact. So there's no punctures, no tears, no damage whatsoever. So what do we get from the Rebirth scene is the Rex can't bite through an inflatable raft. It can't catch a slow-moving target. It can't grab someone directly in front of it. It can't kill you underwater and will abandon a hunt if it becomes mildly inconvenient. So the T-Rex doesn't feel like an animal or a threat or anything. It's kind of, well, just a spicier whitewater rapids ride, really. So if we come into some final summary here, within Primitive War, the Rex is dangerous. It's mostly relentless, and I would say it's believable. Why I say mostly relentless is once it's separated from its mate and its hunting ground, it then completely changes its attitude. Within Rebirth, the Rex is pretty inconsistent. It's kind of selective in how dangerous it wants to be, and it's, well, completely toothless. Like, literally toothless. It can't do a damn thing. So by the end of the raft scene, the Rex isn't scary and it's pretty much irrelevant. And once you have an apex predator that stops being a threat, the entire survival premise collapses with it. So yeah, sorry, there's the difference between them is the Rex within Primitive War is still a threat after it gives up its interest on Leon and Baker, whereas the dinosaurs as a whole, we've already seen the raptors and the Mutodon have no interest in Xavier, and we've now had the Rex randomly give up for no reason. There's kind of
no real threat involved for this family. We know there's not a problem. We know there's going to be no issues now. We can pretty much tell which characters are plot armor and which ones don't. In discussing the finale, think from the two lead characters, which is Zora and Baker respectively, we can kind of see a lot of differences as well in tone and why one leader is effective and the other kind of isn't. So I'll start off with Baker. Within Baker's final moments, tell you everything you really need to know about him without the film ever having to really spell it out. The man doesn't really stumble into heroism, and he isn't acting out of panic or desperation. This is, in fact, a conscious choice made by someone who understands exactly what's about to happen. As the collider is tearing itself apart, Baker throws himself directly into the chaos, grinning like a madman, stabbing the Utahraptor that killed Keyes straight through the fucking neck whilst the world collapses around him. There's nothing really theatrical about it. He knows he's buying time and he understands the cost fully. What makes the moment especially brutal is the animal itself. Cyclops doesn't retreat when the other raptors do. It pushes further in. Its pack has been injured, its dominance has been challenged, and its prey fought back in a way it wasn't supposed to. This isn't a random animal encounter anymore, it's a personal beef between the two. The raptor is willing to risk its own life just to get at Baker, and Baker meets it head on without any form of hesitation. His focus never shifts to the bigger picture or some abstract goal. Everything about his final stand is about stopping the creature from reaching his people. When both of them are finally consumed by the explosion, it doesn't feel symbolic or melodramatic. It feels pretty much earned and very much grounded. And if I'm going to go that far, it's pretty brutally practical as well. So, in contrast, we have Zora's final framing, which undercuts a lot of the image the film has kept insisting that she really represents. As they escape the island, she breaks down emotionally in front of the group, mourning a friend she believes is lost. Despite the mission not being fully finished and the environment, while still being wildly hostile, this is someone who we've been told is a hardened mercenary with years of experience, ex-Marsoc, by the way. Yet she loses composure at the exact moment a real professional would be stuffing it the fuck down and locking the fuck in. I'm going to talk like a Gen Zer. The island is still crawling with predators. The water is still very much dangerous, and the extraction isn't complete. But her urgency or her Spartan resolve, for lack of a better word, completely disappears. And this doesn't really come out of nowhere. It kind of aligns with everything we've already seen from her. She overshares her personal trauma. She cracks under pressure. She's fumbling basic competence early on, which is when she NDs her rifle when she's supposed to hit the mosasaur, and she emotionally unravels when plans fall apart. Where Baker holds himself together to the very end, Zora collapses before the danger is actually over. That's not about grief, it's kind of about timing, whereas Baker survives hell by maintaining discipline till the last second. Zora doesn't, and the difference between them is pretty stark. I mean, it's enough that it fundamentally changes how believable they are as leaders. One of the biggest differences between Primitive War and Jurassic Rebirth is how the film treats character deaths and their emotional weight. Take the Quetzal scene in Rebirth, for instance. Leclerc, a close friend of Duncan, is swallowed whole by a massive pterosaur while effectively making himself a distraction to save his allies. Yet immediately afterwards, the surviving characters act as if nothing happened. Henry, the scientist guy, he falls off the cliff and lands fairly ungracefully Avatar style, and everyone else kind of lands safely or takes the stairs. There's no shock, there's no grief, or, from what I remember, no real acknowledgement of Leclerc's sacrifice, despite the fact that his death literally saved all the others. The humor and levity really undercut this tension, and emotional stakes feel muted. The only character I can think of that actually reacts to a character's death is Zora later, but it's inconsistent and minimal compared to the gravity of everything else that has gone down. Sorry. Other deaths like Ajax and the tattooed women are simply brushed off. Within the next scene where we see this group of characters, they're pretty much laughing and just continue on in the next scene. And which scene I'm on about is the one with the Titanosaurs. And this kind of does emphasize the lack of narrative investment in their losses. If they don't care, I'm going to be real here. Why should any of us? By contrast, Primitive War takes each loss seriously. After Keyes is gone, Logan spirals towards suicide, visibly devastated by the death of his friend and the moral weight of the situation. Baker, too, chooses to sacrifice himself, not for some abstract mission goal, but because he refuses to let the animals reach any more of his friends. His final act is deeply personal and grounded in protecting the people he cares about. The rest of the group reacts accordingly. They're visibly down, demoralized, and require motivation from Baker, who is the leader, by the way, to even continue the mission of shutting down the collider. Each character's death carries weight. It has impact on the survivors and reinforces cohesion and humanity of the group. No one is shrugged off, everyone is missed, and everyone matters. This contrast highlights a fundamental difference in the tone. Primitive War invests in its characters as people, giving the audience a reason to care about their sacrifices and honoring their sacrifices, Rebirth, meanwhile, treats character deaths more like narrative props or visual spectacle, undermining both tension and the emotional impact. As I mentioned earlier, I don't feel like I was altogether clear as this one was an editor's note. Horror seems to be the only one that does react to one of the characters seemingly dying, but because that's a fake out, yeah, it can fuck off. I already did mention that Zora being the leader should not be absolutely breaking down in this moment either. So yeah, I'll give them points for the characters actually caring about what's going on in front of them, but I deduct points for the leader actually breaking down instead of being a bit upset or annoyed, but still realizing that there is a greater threat and a bigger picture to bring their attention towards. So then again, points away for realism for Rebirth for that. Now we finally get to my closing marks and summary for part one. So yeah, without sounding too soppy, thank you so much for making it this far. Really appreciate anyone who's stuck around to watch and listen to me. If you've got any thoughts, comments, or if you think I've missed something or totally misinterpreted something, I'd really love to hear from you. This is very much an open discussion. And even if you think I'm a dick, I still want to hear differing views because that's what I want to keep going in the long term. I was originally planning on making this one long form video, but there's a couple of other videos I want to squeeze in this time period that are, in fact, a bit more time sensitive. For example, I've got a video planned on Leo Bonhart and the unsurvivable yet survivable injuries from Chaos Theory. And I'd want to dive into a couple of things that people have said about the villains of the boys, and I want to get that done before season 5 drops. So looking ahead, part 2 of the series, I'm planning to dive into the difference between the raft scene in the original Jurassic Park book and compare it to the one that we got given in Rebirth. I'll also touch on the failed Jurassic Park 4 script where they were going to be dinosaur/human hybrids and how that contrasts with Rebirth. On top of that, I want to be going into the humor or lack of humor in Primitive War versus Rebirths and why the tone lands so differently between the two. I also want to address some of the common excuses that I'm making up in my head for Rebirth. Yes, it's technically made as a family movie, but that doesn't excuse the fact that it fails on pretty much every metric that I have gone into detail in this video and will go into even more. Stakes and facts should feel real. If you're going to give the excuse of it's a children's movie, let's look at How to Train Your Dragon or Kung Fu Panda or the new latest Puss in Boots. Characters die, consequences indeed matter, and the tension within them works. Saying it's just a dinosaur movie doesn't really wash with me. There's also another one that YouTuber that I regularly watch about dinosaurs is, I'm not going to try and pronounce the last name, but his first name's Clayton. And he's really good channel, by the way. I highly recommend it. But there was a video that he was discussing about the D-Rex breaking out, and he was claiming that the writers didn't care. And I want to discuss that part as well, and why it doesn't wash with me either because it's inconsistent with the rest of the movie. For example, if they didn't care completely, more stuff would be going down, and why not caring could be a positive. And in this case, it's a bit of a negative. They go for the worst kind of not caring. But anyway, yeah, if you watch Clayton, yeah, fucking I'm a fan of his, but I disagree here. So come get me. Sorry. Finally, I just want to say that this is one of the hardest scripts I've actually worked on, and I appreciate anyone that's stuck around this far. If you like what I do, there's more of this, on my channel where it comes from. If not, cheers for your time anyway. Have a great day, and I'll let Colonel Jericho send you out.
Get the fuck out.